Hey everyone, today we're screwing around with crafters. I'm going to go ahead and skip the unusually long tirade about how these are the most revolutionary block in existence and they have changed Minecraft forever. And don't get me wrong, they absolutely are revolutionary. I mean, they've just automated a task that could only be completed manually for the past 11 years. It's just that everybody's raving about that and I have nothing new to add. What I can talk about though is all the useless garbage that I've figured out that you actually can do with this machine. So I guess today's video is going to be just that. We'll be talking about stuff all the way from this completely useless instant crafting, all the way up to that giant line of crafters over there, and whatever the hell this machine is. So let's get into it. Now, the first thing I noticed explicitly when fiddling around with this thing is that it functions essentially as a glorified dropper, only with the ability to actually craft. Let me clear that weather. Rain aside, there is one key difference to this behavior though. They actually have different cooldowns. For some reason, this crafter has pretty much no cooldown. And I'm going to chalk this mechanic to Mojang accidentally forgetting to put a cooldown, because this definitely doesn't seem intentional and we're going to be using it to do some pretty stupid stuff later. But besides the ability to turn recipes into items, they're pretty much the same exact block. So the first question I asked myself was, can it do the same stuff that a dropper does? And I'm not talking about the super simple stuff like can it inject items into a container or receive hopper input output. I'm talking about the more technical stuff like can it perform multiple operations in one moment. Now if we analyze this setup, we can see that the dropper right here injects the item into this container, but in the same exact moment, only immediately after, this dropper fires as well, and we get the item to get spit out the front. And to test this with the crafter, we're actually using cobbled deep slate to first make it into polished deep slate, which then gets immediately injected into here and then instantaneously made into deep slate bricks. And this had me really excited because it opened up the door to the incredibly useless field of instant crafting. What I realized is that as long as the recipe creates the same amount of materials that you need to manufacture the next recipe, then you can essentially change them forever. We've got a deep slate cobbled setup here, and we can add a third crafter, and this ends up creating tiles instantaneously. What's also interesting is if we don't have the necessary materials to create a full recipe instantaneously, we can actually inject other crafters into the same recipe to fulfill that. Here I want to make a chest, and a single crafter is not enough to produce the 8 oak planks we need, so if we trigger 2, and at the right moment, triggering this one, then this one, then this one, then we can get a chest to be outputted instantaneously. However, we can take this much, much further. The way we level it up is with this instantaneous painting crafter, which I've intentionally introduced more steps than necessary to overcomplicate things. You see, we start with bamboo, which we have to make into a block of bamboo, which then gets made into bamboo planks, which then can be finally formed into sticks. And we have 2 sets of those, creating the 8 sticks we need for a painting recipe. In order to create the wool in the center, we make it out of string. What we eventually end up with is an incredibly unreliable, locational, and completely overcomplicated system to rapidly produce an item that you definitely don't need a lot of. But wait, this idea is even stupider because the reality is that crafters are inherently really easy to pipeline. In order to actually create the instant setup, you need to essentially power them in the exact right order, 1, 2, 3, in order of the crafting. But if you just power it from the other direction or literally any random order, it does the exact same thing, only just takes a couple extra hits to fill up these crafters and make the recipe completely normal again. The only conceivable use I can think of for instantaneous auto-crafting is that it leaves any ending crafters completely open. The reality is that with this setup, we have cobbled deep slate, which makes polished, and then into bricks. Similarly, we have blackstone, which makes polished into bricks. But since they both leave this end crafter completely empty, they can share it, and it just works completely fine. Although this is interesting, there's no reason you'd ever need to do this because you could just place more crafters. It's not like they're laggy like hoppers or dust. But if we briefly suspend the disbelief in this system as having any use at all, we can make some pretty neat things. By surrounding a crafter on all sides with iron nuggets and bamboo, we can actually create an instant pickaxe maker using only a slightly convoluted rail and observer setup. The exact same thing can be done with this setup to create TNT as well as a minecart with iron nuggets from the bottom, and then we can just make instant TNT minecarts. We can also do the same thing by surrounding a crafter, this empty one in the center, on all 6 sides with different crafters in order to make the 5 iron ingots that we need, and the instant chest crafter to make a hopper. And we can pull this out from the bottom crafter into this hopper right here. And creating this empty crafter behavior is inherently difficult because you have to produce exactly as many items as you need for the next recipe. If I simply produce stone bricks and then expect to insta-craft them into slabs, we're going to be left over with a stone brick. And this is just going to compound, and now suddenly it doesn't matter that we're insta-crafting anymore because it just totally doesn't matter. We've screwed up the empty instant crafter. But what if I told you we could get even stupider? You see, the thing is that some recipes actually make the things that are needed to make the things that are needed to make that recipe. We can make an iron block out of iron ingots and make iron ingots out of an iron block. And by running these 2 recipes into each other, well, we can just do nothing. This legitimately just takes the iron ingots and does nothing to them. It doesn't change them in any way at all. We've successfully crafted and uncrafted something instantaneously. But actually, when I say we didn't change anything about the first item at all, I was actually lying. Number 1, we can actually strip items of their names. As you can see, I've got a bunch of items that are named, and we can directly convert them back into the original version that has no name. But the more important thing is that what we do is we change the location of the items. The iron ingots that were once here are now going to end up here. And now I'm not going to waste any time, because the thing is if we take iron blocks, run into a crafter, make iron ingots, make iron blocks, make iron ingots, make iron blocks, and we do all of this in the exact right order in the exact same moment, well, we can accelerate these iron ingots instantaneously over basically any distance. But hey, wait, isn't this just a really stupid way of making an instant dropper line that only works for certain items that can be crafted into and out of themselves? Yes. But wait, like many points in this video, there is another twist. You see, remember that single tick cooldown I told you about earlier? The fact that for some reason they forgot to code in the exact same cooldown that the dropper has? This 4 times lower cooldown essentially allows us to take that dainty little instant crafter line and significantly ramp up the speeds. This leads us to this abomination. This stupid contraption boasts an unhealthy 8 rows of observers, and this essentially means that we can power or 0-tick these crafters on the inside exactly once every 20th of a second, and that is as fast as it can physically go. That kind of speed, combined with the fact that these iron ingots are going to be accelerating through the crafter tunnel instantaneously due to the setup of these observers, means that we can get all that iron through this tunnel in exactly that amount of time. I don't exactly know how long that was, but importantly, it was fast. So, what did I learn? Number 1, I learned that I actually really hate working in anything other than modded Minecraft because it has none of the tools that I use pretty much exclusively all the time. I also couldn't be bothered to recreate my normal redstone world, so this is why we're stuck with this hellish weather. But we also learned that crafters are really interesting, and they can do a little bit more than just crafting items. There's a bunch of stuff that all other people are doing, like making counters, or making interfaces using their signal strength applications, and all of this stuff I'd love to dabble in the moment that this gets ported to a version that I can actually use. So I guess even though we're not going to be seeing much crafter content on the channel unless you really want it, still stay tuned for all the stuff that we'll be doing in the future in 1.20, such as this giant machine that you'll find out about when I actually get around to making the video on it. Or the 2D Rubik's Cube that may or may not have not been worked on since the last video. Anyways, that'll be it for today. If you want to see more of my surprisingly cold takes on new additions, as well as my machines and the other content that I make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.